Welcome everyone to another tutorial from Studio 180 Design. My name is Deb Tucker, and today we're going to talk about a technique sheet that we've developed to go along with the large square squared. The large square squared tool is one of two tools that we have to do a specific shape. The shape that it was designed to make is the traditional square set on point inside of another square. All by itself, if it just did that, that would be awesome. But once we get a tool in our hand at Studio 180, what we do is we start to play with it. And we start to develop other things that we didn't know we could actually do with the tool. And one of the shapes that we were playing with was this specific shape. This unit is a unit that we discovered kind of by accident that can be easily made with the large square squared tool. We've designed and written up a technique sheet that will talk you through everything you need to do. We called it Birds of Paradise because it looks similar to a flying geese unit. If you saw a traditional flying geese unit, you'd have two triangles here and you'd have a large single triangle in the middle there. And we're going to piece that triangle, use the large square squared ruler to trim things down as we go, and end up with perfectly sized units that have all the seams and all the points where we want them to be. The rest of the video is going to be talking about how to make specifically this size unit. This is going to be a 4-inch by 8-inch size unit. The first step in the process will be to consult the chart to know the size you want to make. And once you know the size, you're going to need to cut some squares. And these are the squares that you need to cut. For the piece section of the shape of the Birds of Paradise unit, you're going to need to cut one square of each one. A square of pink, a square of green, and a square of yellow. Then you need to cut just one square of what will be the large triangles. So that's what we're going to need to start out with. After we start with our 1, 1, and 1 and our 4 separate squares, we're going to cut those squares into pieces. The large squares are going to be cut in half diagonally just once to produce these half square triangles that you see in the shape. The other squares, you can stack them all together. Put the pink, the green, the yellow all together, but they're going to be cut on both diagonals, this way and this way, from corner to corner, to give me a number of quarter square triangle pieces. Now what we're going to do, my suggestion for this is, once you've got the pieces cut, pull out the pieces that you're going to need to be able to make this unit. And what I'm going to need is one pink, I'm going to need one green, I'm going to need 2 yellow, and I'm going to need these 2 here. You can see where we're headed. We're going to start the construction process with the 2 triangles that are in the middle. They're going to be used to create a square by placing the 2 triangles right sides together, line up, and stitch along the long diagonal edge. That is going to give you a square that looks like this. Now it's a pretty good looking square, but it's not the correct size. Remember, with Studio 180 Design products, what we do is we like to make things a little bigger than they need to be and trim them down. And this is the first thing that we're going to trim down. So we're going to take these other pieces, kind of move them out of the way for just a minute. And you see, we're going to take this center square, and the chart will tell you what you need to do. We're going to use part A of the square squared tool. And the part A has a series of window templates in it that we're going to use to trim this down. I'm going to position the triangle. I happen to be right-handed, so I'm going to position the triangle like this. Part A of the large square squared tool has a center diagonal. I'm going to put that center diagonal guideline onto the center diagonal seam, and you'll trim this to a perfectly sized square. I'll trim 2 sides, turn around and trim the other 2 sides so that it will be perfectly sized for a square that's set on point. Left-hander, simply rotate your unit. When you rotate that square so that the diagonal goes in the opposite direction, you can use the tool in the same manner, putting the diagonal along the seam line, trimming up and across, so that when you are done, this square that you have in the center is a precision size piece. I'll go ahead and trim that so you can see what I'm all about. Let me find my cutter here, right-handed. The diagonal's in this direction. Make sure that I'm going to be able to trim this to the 4-inch size up and across. You can see that it's built a little bigger, but not much. There's just a little trim there. Rotate the unit 180 degrees. Put the unit down for the second trim. I've got several lines that I look at now. What I'm looking at now is the center diagonal on the sewn seam, and I'm also paying attention to the 2 cleanup lines that line up with the edges that I just trimmed. So now I have a square that is the precision size to be able to make this unit into the next step. What we'll do after we have that square is we're going to be stitching these triangles into place to continue the process. But before we go any further, let me step back a minute and talk about the pressing. What we found that gives us the best end result is to always press the seams away from this triangle that's in the middle of the unit. When I flip this over, you're going to be able to see. When I came to the pink and the green, what I made sure to do is to press the seam on there away from the green triangle. When I add these yellow triangles, I'm going to do the same thing. When I go to stitch the yellow triangles on, I'll do one and then the other. What I'm going to do is flip the triangle over, and I line up the 90-degree angle. Make my stitch along that side, and then press again away from that center triangle. Let me pull these pieces in. You're going to be able to see what I'm talking about. The first thing I did was lined up these, gave them a stitch, and pressed away from the green triangle. When I did the second one, I did my stitching, did my pressing, so that the pressing is away from that center triangle. At this point, you're not going to do any trimming yet, but by lining up those 90-degree angles when you go to do your trimming, by lining up this, you should now have 2 nice long straight edges on your pieced quarter square triangle. Here is where your half square triangles are going to come into play. The next step is going to be to stitch these oversized half square triangles onto this pieced quarter square triangle. When I put these together, I'm going to kind of center that pieced triangle over top of that half square unpieced triangle. And rather than trying to line up the 45-degree angle precisely, give yourself a little wiggle room. Leave a little space right there. Stitch along. One of the reasons that we pressed away from that center green triangle is that gives us a great visible X. The stitching across is where you want to do this stitch so that you're going to get to keep all your points on your unit. So you'll stitch this. Once you stitch it and you press it, you'll end up with this. Repeat the same procedure. Flip this over. Do not line up the 45-degree exactly. Give yourself a little wiggle room there. Stitch that as well right through the seam line X to give us our points. Once you're done with your stitching, press those seams toward the long triangles. Your seams want to go that way because there are no seams in this large triangle section. You will now have an oversized, all around the edges, oversized bird of paradise unit. This is where you're going to use the part B section of your large square squared. If any of you have my wing clipper tool, one of the things that we do when we trim with the wing clipper is we set up our unit so it looks just like this. I call this trimming the valley first. But because we're using the large square tool, what I do with my trimming is I'm going to turn this unit around so that it's in the mountain position. Now I have a mountain in the middle. Pulling out my large square tool, what I'm going to look at are X's. This is a 4-inch by 8-inch unit. So what I'm going to do across the top of the tool is I'm going to find the X that has the 8 on it. That X is going to go at the top of my mountain. And when I put that X up at the top, what you're going to see happen is there are broken lines here and here that come down from that X that are centering the tool over top of my oversized piece unit. So I'm not looking at a lot of horizontal and vertical lines. And again, this is a right-handed trim. If you happen to be doing this and you are left-handed, you will rotate your unit like we do with many of our tools, just rotate it 90 degrees, line up the same X here, line up the broken lines so you can trim left-handed. Remember, all the tools in the Studio 180 lineup are designed for you to easily translate from right-handed trimming to left-handed trimming. So you get to choose which way you like to trim. I am definitely right-handed. X is here, broken lines are here. What I'll do is trim up, trim across. You can see it's oversized, but again, not by very much. Once I make the first trim, lift the tool, rotate the unit 180 degrees. And when I put this back on here now, what I'm looking at here is the X with the 8 again. It's going to go right at the top of that center triangle. And I'm also going to be looking at a guideline here and a guideline here. I'm going to be trimming this to 4.5 by 8.5 inches. And my 4.5 inch guideline is here, and my 8.5 inch guideline is here. You do it once or twice, you're going to see right away. But the 8 with the X will go right along that center triangle. You trim it. You have a perfectly sized unit. All of your points are visible. All of your seam allowances are there for your stitching. Your seam allowances here, your seam allowances here. You can make this really difficult unit quickly and easily, and when you put one to the next, they're going to be perfect every time. But I do want to give you some food for thought. That's what we do at Studio 180. We start with this, but then say, but what else can we do with this tool? And these are some things I want you to think about. This center square, we pieced it, we trimmed it with part A to give me a square that's set on point. What if I wanted that center square a simple square? What if I wanted to fussy cut and put a snowman in the middle? Well, instead of piecing that square, I can just use my fabric, use my part A tool, and precision cut an on-point square and build a unit around that. What if, instead of a half square triangle in the middle, what if I wanted to put a 4-patch in the middle? Make a 4-patch. Use part A of the tool, trim it to a 4-inch center square. I've got another look. What if, instead of a piece square or a simple square, I've got quarter square triangles? I make the hourglass unit. When you have that, take your part A, use the guidelines, use the diagonals that are on there to trim that to a precision size square, follow through the rest of the process. And this one makes me just crazy. I definitely want to make something with this project. I make a shaded 4-patch. And if you don't know how to make the shaded 4-patch, watch my video on pick up my Tucker trimmer for making that shaded 4-patch. Because I do that with strip piecing and it's really cool. But I can make it, trim it to size with my part A tool, and guess what? I've got this interesting looking shape. I didn't use any paper foundation. I don't have to remove any of that when I'm done. And I'm using tools that allow me to have a little wiggle room so I don't have to be absolutely perfect. Think about it. Pick up. If you don't have the large square, there's lots of things you can do with that, including snail's trails, including the economy block that you can do for your Storm at Sea quilt, and pick up our Bird of Paradise technique sheet. You'll have all the step-by-step directions right there in front of you. I want to wish you lots of luck. I hope that you send me photos of your projects when you're all done. And if you can't find them at your local quilt shop, you come visit us at our website, studio180design.net. We'll have them ready to put in your hands in a few days down the road. Good luck with all. Thanks.